The first mortar shell hit so close that Rowan Mercer felt the ground beneath him ripple like water, and the second sent him tumbling headlong into what he initially thought was a drainage ditch, but turned out to be the entrance to a root cellar buried beneath an abandoned farmhouse. He landed hard on packed earth, his rifle clattering away into the darkness, and for several desperate seconds he could do nothing but gasp and try to remember how to breathe through the pain radiating from his ribs. Above him, the bombardment continued, the thunder of artillery fire shaking loose dirt from the cellar ceiling, and Rowan knew with absolute certainty that staying above ground would mean death. He had become separated from his unit during the chaotic retreat through the border villages. The orc clans had launched a massive offensive 3 days ago, pushing deep into human territory, and the scattered remnants of the frontier garrison were falling back toward the river crossings. Rowan had been a soldier for 4 years, long enough to know when a battle was lost, and this one had been lost before it even began. The orcs had superior numbers, better positioning, and a ferocity born of desperation. Their lands had been encroached upon for decades, their hunting grounds seized, their sacred sites desecrated. This was their reckoning, and the human settlements were paying the price. Rowan crawled deeper into the cellar, his hands searching the darkness until they found the rough wooden shelves lining the walls. A few dusty jars remained, forgotten when the farm had been evacuated weeks earlier. The cellar was perhaps 15 feet square, with a low ceiling that forced him to remain crouched. There was a heavy wooden door at the top of the earthen steps, and Rowan hauled himself up to push it partially closed, leaving just enough of a gap for air. Through that narrow opening, he could see the farmhouse above burning, flames licking at the night sky. He had just settled back against the far wall, trying to assess his injuries, when he heard movement at the cellar entrance. Rowan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt since his rifle was lost somewhere in the darkness. The door creaked open wider, and a figure descended rapidly, pulling the door shut behind them. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy breathing and the muffled explosions outside. Then a match flared to life, and Rowan found himself staring at an orc warrior. She was perhaps 20 years old, with the deep green skin and prominent tusks that marked her as pure-blooded, and she wore the leather and bone armor of a clan scout. Her black hair was bound back in a practical braid, and her amber eyes widened in shock as she took in the human soldier crouched against the opposite wall. They stared at each other for a frozen heartbeat, and then both moved simultaneously. She reached for the war axe at her hip while Rowan drew his knife, and they faced each other in the flickering matchlight like two cornered animals. The match burned down to her fingers, and she dropped it with a hiss. Darkness returned, absolute and suffocating. "Stay on your side," she said in heavily accented but clear human speech. "I have no wish to die tonight fighting in this hole." Rowan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Then we are in agreement," he managed. "The cellar is large enough for both of us. Until morning," she added. "When the bombardment stops, I leave first. You wait 1 hour, then go your way." Agreed. It was the strangest truce Rowan had ever negotiated, conducted entirely in darkness with an enemy he could not see. He listened to her moving around the cellar, settling herself against what he assumed was the opposite wall. The sounds of battle continued above them, but they seemed more distant now, moving away toward the east. Both armies were shifting position, and this little pocket of earth had become temporarily irrelevant to the larger conflict. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Rowan's ribs throbbed where he had landed, and he suspected at least one was cracked. His canteen had been lost along with his rifle, and his throat was parched from smoke and dust. He could hear the orc woman breathing across from him, steady and controlled, and he wondered what had driven her to seek shelter. Orc warriors were known for their fierce courage in battle. She must have been separated from her unit as well, or perhaps wounded. "You are injured," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the darkness. It was not a question. "How can you possibly know that?" Rowan asked. "I can smell the blood." "And you are breathing wrong, like someone with broken ribs." Rowan found himself almost smiling despite the situation. "You have a keen nose. Yes, I think 1 or 2 ribs are cracked. Nothing fatal. Ribs can puncture lungs if you are not careful. Thank you for the cheerful assessment." A pause, and then she made a sound that might have been the ghost of a laugh. "You have spirit for a human soldier trapped in a hole with an enemy. And you have courtesy for an orc warrior who could probably kill me in this darkness before I landed a single blow. Probably." Now there was definite amusement in her voice. "I could definitely kill you. Then I am grateful for our truce." Another long silence fell. Above them the bombardment had stopped, but they could hear shouting in the distance, orders being called in both human and orcish languages. The armies were regrouping, preparing for whatever the dawn would bring. Rowan shifted position carefully, trying to ease the pressure on his damaged ribs, and accidentally knocked over one of the jars on the shelf beside him. It fell to the dirt floor with a dull thump, but did not break. "Clumsy," the orc woman observed. "I cannot see in the dark as well as you apparently can. I cannot see either, but I have better awareness of space and sound. A useful skill in battle. A necessary skill for survival." Her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "My name is Shara Grimtusk. If we are to spend the night in this cellar together, we may as well know what to call each other." The fact that she had offered her name first was, Rowan realized, a gesture of respect or perhaps trust. Among orcs, names carried weight and meaning. "Rowan Mercer," he replied, "scout and rifleman in the Frontier Guard, or what is left of it. You are retreating." "Yes, your clans have won this battle, perhaps this war. Perhaps." Shara did not sound triumphant, merely tired. "War is war. There are no true winners, only those who survive." It was a surprisingly philosophical statement from an enemy warrior, and Rowan found himself curious despite the situation. "Is that an orc saying?" "It is something my grandmother told me before she died. She lived through the last great war between our peoples, 30 years ago. She said the same thing then, that the only victory was in living to see another season." "Your grandmother sounds like she was wise." "She was, and she would have struck me for hiding in a cellar during battle." There was genuine shame in Shara's voice, and Rowan felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "You are not hiding. You are surviving to fight another day. That is tactical wisdom, not cowardice. You do not understand orc culture. To retreat, to seek shelter when your clan is fighting, it is seen as weakness. But you did it anyway." "Yes." A long pause. "Because I am tired of the killing. Because I saw 3 of my shield sisters die today, cut down by your people's rifles, and I could not bear to watch any more death. So I ran, and now I am here, speaking with a human soldier in the darkness, and my clan would cast me out if they knew." The raw honesty in her words struck Rowan silent for a moment. He had never considered that orc warriors might feel the same exhaustion and sorrow that he felt, the same bone-deep weariness that came from too much violence and too little meaning. The propaganda had always painted orcs as mindless savages who gloried in battle, but Shara sounded as human as anyone he had served with. "I ran too," Rowan said quietly. "My unit was being overrun. The lieutenant was already dead, and the sergeant was screaming for a retreat, and I just ran. I did not look back to see who might need help. I just wanted to survive." Then we are both cowards together, or both survivors. Shara made that almost laugh sound again. You are very determined to see the positive side, Rowan Mercer. It is either that or despair, and despair serves no purpose. They fell into a more comfortable silence after that, the kind that comes when two people have shared something vulnerable and found unexpected understanding. Rowan's ribs continued to ache, and his throat was painfully dry, but he felt oddly at peace despite the circumstances. There was something surreal about sitting in darkness with an enemy, speaking more honestly than he had spoken to his own comrades in months. Hours passed. Rowan dozed fitfully, jerking awake whenever the pain in his ribs spiked, and each time he woke, he could hear Shara breathing steadily across from him, apparently keeping watch. Once he heard her moving around and then felt something being pressed into his hand. "What is this?" he asked. "Water. I found a jug on one of the shelves. It is old but seems clean enough." Rowan took the ceramic jug and drank gratefully, the water cool and slightly stale but utterly wonderful. He drank deeply, then forced himself to stop and offered it back toward where he thought she was sitting. "You should drink as well." "I already did." "Then drink more. We are sharing this cellar. We should share its resources as well." He felt her take the jug from his hands, heard her drink. When she handed it back, her fingers brushed against his briefly, and he was startled by the warmth of her skin. He had expected orcs to be cold somehow, as inhuman in body temperature as they were supposedly inhuman in mind. But Shara was as warm as anyone, as alive as anyone. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are the one who found the water." "Yes, but you insisted on sharing. That is not something I would have expected from a human soldier." "What would you have expected? For you to drink it all? For you to see me as a monster who deserves nothing?" Rowan set the water jug carefully aside. "I have killed orcs in battle," he said slowly. "That is true. But I have never seen them as monsters. How could I when you bleed and die just as we do? When you feel fear and pain just as we do? Most of your kind do not think that way. Most of your kind probably think all humans are greedy land thieves who would exterminate orcs if given the chance." "Yes." Shara's voice was thoughtful. "That is exactly what we are taught, that humans see us as animals to be hunted or enslaved. And some humans do see orcs that way. Just as some orcs see all humans as enemies, but hatred is taught, Shara. It is not born into us." "That is a dangerous philosophy for a soldier. Perhaps, but it is what I believe." Another silence, longer this time, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Outside, the sounds of battle had faded almost entirely. Dawn could not be more than a few hours away, and with it would come the end of their strange truce. Rowan found himself wishing they had more time, which was absurd. She was an orc warrior. He was a human soldier. They were enemies by every definition that mattered to the world outside this cellar, but in the darkness, none of that seemed to matter quite as much. "Tell me about your life before the war," Shara said suddenly. "What did you do when you were not a soldier?" "I was a farmer's son. Wheat and barley mostly, with some cattle. It was a good life, simple and honest. I joined the guard because the pay was better and I wanted to see something beyond the same fields I had plowed since childhood." Rowan laughed softly, bitterly. "I have certainly seen things. Just not the things I hoped to see. Do you regret joining? Every day, and you? What did you do before you became a warrior?" "I have always been a warrior. In my clan, every child learns to fight from the time they can walk, but I also learned tracking and hunting from my grandmother. She taught me to read the forest, to understand the language of animals and plants. I was good at it." Pride crept into Shara's voice. "The clan elders said I had the gift of the old ways." "That sounds beautiful." It was. "I loved the forest, the freedom of running through the trees, the challenge of tracking prey. And then the war came, and all those skills were turned to tracking humans instead of deer, to killing instead of feeding my people. You think there will ever be peace between our kinds?" Shara was quiet for so long that Rowan thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not know, I hope so, but hope is dangerous, it makes you vulnerable. Hope is also what keeps us alive. There you go again, being stubbornly positive." Rowan smiled in the darkness. "Someone has to be." They talked through the remaining hours of the night, their conversation wandering from topic to topic like a stream finding its course. Shara told him about her clan's territory in the northern mountains, about the great gatherings where all the clans would come together to trade and celebrate. Rowan described the harvest festivals in his village, the way the entire community would work together to bring in the crops, and then feast for 3 days straight. They found common ground in unexpected places. Both loved thunderstorms. Both had complicated relationships with their fathers. Both had secretly wanted to be something other than what their societies had demanded of them. As the night wore on, Rowan became aware that something had shifted between them. What had started as a tense truce had become something else, something he could not quite name. He caught himself listening not just to Shara's words, but to the nuances of her voice, the way she paused before saying something important, the soft sound of her breathing in the quiet moments. And he realized with a start that he was attracted to her, not despite what she was, but because of who she was. Brave and thoughtful and honest in ways that transcended the arbitrary divisions of species. It was a dangerous realization, one that could lead nowhere good. But in the safety of the darkness, Rowan allowed himself to feel it anyway. "The sky is getting lighter," Shara said eventually. Her voice seemed closer than before, and Rowan wondered if she had moved nearer to him during the night or if he had moved toward her. "Dawn is coming." "Yes." Rowan felt a sharp pang of regret. "You should go first, as we agreed. And you will wait an hour." "I will." Neither of them moved. The cellar had become a sanctuary, a place outside of war and hatred, and leaving it meant returning to a world where they were supposed to be enemies. Rowan heard Shara shift position, and then he felt her hand touch his arm, finding him in the growing dimness. "Rowan Mercer," she said. "I am glad we shared this night. I am glad I met you. I am glad as well, Shara Grimtusk." He covered her hand with his own, marveling at the simple contact. "Be safe out there. And you, do not let those ribs kill you." "I will be careful." She withdrew her hand slowly, and Rowan heard her move toward the cellar entrance. The wooden door creaked open, and gray morning light spilled down the steps. In that light, Rowan saw Shara clearly for the first time. She was beautiful in a way that was utterly foreign to him, strong and fierce, with features that were undeniably orcish but somehow perfect in their arrangement. She looked back at him, and their eyes met for just a moment. Then she was gone, climbing out of the cellar and disappearing into the morning. Rowan sat in the strengthening light, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. He waited the promised hour, though every minute felt like agony. His ribs screamed in protest when he finally stood, and the climb out of the cellar left him dizzy and nauseous. The farmhouse was a burned-out shell, still smoking in places. Bodies littered the surrounding fields, both human and orc, and the morning air stank of death and cordite. Rowan moved carefully through the ruins, heading west toward where he hoped to find what remained of his unit. The retreat took 3 more days of hard marching, always staying ahead of the orc advance. Rowan rejoined the scattered remnants of his company on the second day, and no one questioned where he had been. There were too many missing faces, too much chaos, for anyone to keep track of individual soldiers. They crossed the river on the 4th day, and the engineers blew the bridges behind them. The orc clans did not pursue beyond the river. They had reclaimed their territory and seemed content, for now, to consolidate their gains. A week later, Rowan stood in a field hospital, his ribs properly bound, and listened to the captain explain that their unit was being disbanded. Too many casualties, too few replacements. Those who wanted to could transfer to other units, but Rowan found that he had no desire to continue being a soldier. He took his discharge papers and a small sum of back pay, and he walked away from the army without looking back. He should have gone home to his father's farm, but instead, Rowan found himself drifting north, following the border between human and orc territory. He took work where he could find it, helping with harvests, repairing fences, clearing land. The frontier was in chaos, refugees from both sides mixing together in uneasy coexistence, and there was always work for someone willing to labor without asking too many questions. Autumn gave way to winter, and Rowan found himself in a small settlement called Riverside that straddled the new border. It was a strange place, populated by humans who had refused to flee, and a handful of orcs who had been cast out by their clans for various offenses. They coexisted out of necessity rather than friendship, trading goods and services but rarely mingling socially. Rowan took a room above a tavern and found work as a woodcutter, spending his days in the forest with an axe and his nights drinking just enough to keep the memories at bay. He thought about Shara constantly. He told himself it was foolish, that their encounter had been a single night in extraordinary circumstances, that she had probably forgotten him already. But he could not forget the sound of her voice, the warmth of her hand on his arm, the unexpected connection they had forged in that cellar. Sometimes he dreamed that he saw her in the marketplace or on a forest path, and he would wake with his heart pounding, feeling the loss of something he had never really had. Winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that isolated Riverside for weeks at a time. Rowan kept to himself mostly, though he gradually became acquainted with some of the other residents. There was a human woman named Martha who ran the general store and always had a kind word for everyone. An old orc called Broken Tooth who worked as a blacksmith despite his advanced age. A family of mixed heritage, a human father and orc mother with 3 children who were treated with suspicion by both communities. It was Martha who first mentioned the orc woman living alone in a cabin about 5 miles north of the settlement. "Strange one," she said to Rowan one day as he bought supplies. "Keeps to herself completely. Comes in once a month for basics, pays in furs and herbs, then disappears back into the forest. Some of the orc folk say she was cast out by her clan for cowardice in battle, but I do not hold with gossip." Rowan's heart had begun pounding before Martha finished speaking. "What is her name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Calls herself Shara, never gave a clan name." Rowan stood very still, the supplies forgotten in his hands. It could be a coincidence. Shara was probably a common name among orcs, but something in his chest insisted otherwise, a certainty that had nothing to do with logic. "This cabin," he said slowly. "Where exactly is it?" Martha gave him directions with a knowing look that suggested she saw more than Rowan wanted her to see. He left the store in a daze, his mind racing. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that seeking out Shara, if it even was Shara, would be a mistake. What would he say to her? What possible future could they have? But that night, lying in his cold room above the tavern, Rowan knew he could not simply let this go. He had to know if it was her. He had to see her again, even if it was only to confirm that the connection he had felt in that cellar had been real and not just a product of fear and darkness. 3 days later, on a clear, cold morning, Rowan set out north into the forest. He carried a pack with some basic supplies and told himself he was just exploring, just taking a long walk to clear his head. But he followed Martha's directions precisely, and as the miles fell away beneath his snowshoes, his pulse quickened with anticipation and dread. The cabin appeared through the trees exactly where Martha had said it would be, a small, sturdy structure built in the orc style, with timber walls and a sod roof. Smoke rose from the chimney, and there were fresh tracks in the snow around the clearing. Rowan stopped at the edge of the trees, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What right did he have to intrude on someone's solitude? Before he could make a decision, the cabin door opened and Shara emerged with an armload of firewood. She was dressed in warm furs against the winter cold, her black braid hanging over one shoulder, and she looked even more beautiful than Rowan remembered. She saw him immediately, her body going tense and alert, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other across the snowy clearing. Then Shara dropped the firewood and crossed the distance between them in long, rapid strides. Rowan barely had time to react before she reached him, and for a wild second he thought she might strike him. Instead, she grabbed the front of his coat with both hands and pulled him close, staring into his face with an intensity that stole his breath. "It is you," she said, and her voice shook. "It is really you. I thought I was seeing a ghost." "I heard there was an orc woman living alone out here," Rowan managed. "I had to know if it was you." "Why?" The question was almost a demand. "Why would you seek me out? We are nothing to each other. One night in a cellar does not make us anything more than strangers." "If that were true, you would not have grabbed me like you were afraid I might disappear." Shara's hands tightened on his coat and then suddenly released him. She stepped back, her expression conflicted. "You should not have come here, Rowan. I know. But I could not stay away once I knew you might be here." He took a breath, letting honesty override caution. "I have thought about you every day since that night. I know it is insane. I know it is impossible, but I had to see you again." "Why?" Shara asked again, but this time the word was softer, almost pleading. "Why would you want anything to do with an orc who was cast out by her own people? Is that what happened?" "Yes." She turned away from him, hugging herself against the cold. "I could not go back to fighting after that night. I could not unsee what I had seen, unlearn what I had learned. That humans were not monsters, that we were all just people trying to survive. So I walked away from my clan and they declared me dead to them. I am no one now, belonging nowhere." "You belong here," Rowan said quietly. "You built a life for yourself. That takes courage." "It is not courage, it is cowardice. I ran from my responsibilities, from my people." "No, you chose a different path. There is nothing cowardly about that." Shara looked back at him over her shoulder, and Rowan saw tears glistening in her amber eyes. "Why are you saying these things? Why are you here?" "Because I have felt more alone in the last 3 months than I have in my entire life. Because I cannot stop thinking about the woman I met in that cellar, who was honest and brave and kind when she had every reason to be none of those things. Because I think, somehow, we were meant to find each other again. That is insanity. Yes, complete insanity." Rowan smiled crookedly. "But that does not make it untrue." For a long moment, Shara just looked at him, and Rowan could see the war being waged behind her eyes, desire fighting with fear, hope battling with doubt. Then she shook her head slowly. "Come inside," she said quietly, "before we both freeze to death. We can at least talk somewhere warm." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a few pieces of handmade furniture arranged around the single room. Furs and hides hung from the rafters, curing for sale or trade, and herbs dried in bunches by the window. It smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something faintly spicy that Rowan could not identify. Shara gestured for him to sit by the fire while she made tea. They sat in awkward silence for a while, nursing the hot mugs, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap between that night in the cellar and this winter morning in her cabin. Finally, Shara spoke. "I thought about you too," she admitted. "More than I should have. I told myself I was being foolish, that you were just a human I had shared a desperate night with and nothing more. But I could not forget the way you spoke to me, like I was a person, not a monster. You are a person, an extraordinary person. I am an orc woman living alone in the wilderness because she could not stomach any more killing. That is not extraordinary. That is pathetic." "No." Rowan set down his tea and leaned forward. "You chose peace over violence. You chose your own conscience over your clan's expectations. That is one of the bravest things I have ever heard of. My clan would not see it that way." "Then your clan is wrong." Shara laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You make everything sound so simple." "I know it is not simple. But that does not mean we have to accept the hatred and division that everyone else insists upon. Shara, I left the army because I could not fight anymore. I could not kill people who might be like you, people who were forced into war they did not want, people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. And I have been drifting for months, trying to figure out what to do with myself, where I belong. And then I heard about you, and suddenly I knew. I belong wherever you are. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, that I fell in love with you that night in the cellar, and every day since has only made it worse. I know we barely know each other. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is impossible, but I had to tell you. I had to give us a chance." Shara stood abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the snow-covered forest. Rowan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the windowsill. He had laid his heart bare, and now there was nothing to do but wait for her response. "You cannot love me," Shara said finally, her voice rough. "You do not know what that would mean. The isolation, the judgment, the danger. There are humans who would kill you for associating with an orc. There are orcs who would kill both of us for this transgression. You would be giving up any chance at a normal life. I do not want a normal life. I want a life that means something. And you mean something to me, Shara. You mean everything." She turned from the window, and now the tears were flowing freely down her green cheeks. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am so afraid of hoping for this, of believing it could be real." Rowan stood and crossed to her slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When he reached her, he gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs. "It is real," he said softly. "This is real. Let yourself feel it." Shara looked up at him, and in her amber eyes Rowan saw his own hope reflected back at him. Then she was kissing him, fierce and desperate and tender all at once, her tusks pressing against his cheeks in a sensation that was strange and perfect. Rowan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and felt the last pieces of his broken heart slot back into place. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard. Shara rested her forehead against his, and Rowan could feel her trembling. "This is insane," she said. "Yes, it will be incredibly difficult. Yes, but I want it anyway. I want you. Then you have me, for as long as you will have me." Shara pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "Forever. I want you forever." "Then forever it is." They talked for hours that day, sitting by the fire, slowly filling in the gaps in their knowledge of each other. Shara told him about her life in the clan, the pressure to be a perfect warrior, the weight of expectations that had always felt like a burden rather than an honor. Rowan told her about his childhood on the farm, his complicated relationship with his father who had never understood his dreams, the way the war had changed him in ways he could not fully articulate. As the afternoon faded toward evening, the conversation turned practical. Rowan had a little money saved from his work, and Shara had her furs and herbs. Together, they could survive the winter comfortably. But what would happen after that? Could they truly build a life together in this isolated place? "We make our own way," Shara said firmly. "We do not wait for the world to accept us. We create a life worth living here in this cabin, and we do not apologize for it. And if trouble comes, then we face it together." It was decided then. Rowan would return to Riverside to collect his few belongings and settle his affairs, and then he would come back to the cabin. They would winter together, and in the spring, they would decide what their future would look like. It was a plan built on faith rather than certainty, but that seemed appropriate somehow. Rowan left as the sun was setting, but not before kissing Shara one more time, a long, sweet kiss that promised more to come. He walked back through the darkening forest feeling lighter than he had in months, his heart singing with possibility. The next few days passed in a blur. Rowan collected his belongings, paid his debts at the tavern, and made his farewells to the few people in Riverside he had come to know. Martha gave him a knowing smile and a package of dried goods. "For you and your lady," she said with a wink, and Rowan did not bother to deny it. He returned to Shara's cabin on a bright cold morning, his pack stuffed with supplies and his heart full of hope. She was waiting for him in the doorway, and the smile that lit her face when she saw him made Rowan feel like he could walk through fire unscathed. That night, they made love for the first time, learning the geography of each other's bodies with tender curiosity. Shara's skin was softer than Rowan had expected, her strength tempered with surprising gentleness. She traced the scar on his shoulder from an old training accident, and he kissed the mark on her collarbone where an enemy blade had come too close during the war. They were both warriors, both survivors, both scarred by the violence they had left behind. But in each other's arms they could begin to heal. Winter deepened, and their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rowan chopped wood and maintained the cabin while Shara hunted and checked her trap lines. They cooked together, ate together, slept tangled in each other's arms beneath piles of furs. In the evenings they talked about everything and nothing, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Sometimes they would sit in companionable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. It was not always easy. They had moments of miscommunication, times when cultural differences created friction. Shara's directness could feel blunt and hurtful to Rowan, while his tendency to soften difficult truths frustrated her. But they learned to navigate these differences, to communicate with patience and love, and each challenge they overcame only strengthened their bond. One night, about a month after Rowan had moved in, Shara asked him the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "You have any regrets?" She said quietly. They were lying in bed, Rowan's head on her shoulder, watching the firelight dance across the ceiling. "About what?" "About choosing this life. About choosing me. You gave up everything, your people, your family, any chance at a conventional future." Rowan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I miss my mother," he said finally. "She died when I was young, but I miss the idea of her, the life we might have had if she had lived. And I suppose I miss the simplicity of the farm sometimes, the predictability of seasons and harvests. But regret? No. I have no regrets. This life with you is more real, more meaningful than anything I left behind. Even knowing how hard it will be, how isolated we will always be, we have each other. That is enough." Shara turned her head to kiss his temple. "You are too good for me, Rowan Mercer." "No. I am exactly as good as you deserve, which is to say, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." She laughed, a warm, rich sound that Rowan loved. "You humans and your romance, you make everything into poetry. Is that a complaint?" "Never." As winter gave way to early spring, They ventured further from the cabin, exploring the forest together. Shara taught Rowan her tracking skills, showing him how to read the signs that animals left behind, how to move silently through the underbrush. In turn, Rowan taught her some of the farming knowledge he had grown up with, talking about crop rotation and soil management, things that might be useful if they decided to start a small garden. It was on one of these expeditions that they ran into trouble. They were following a deer trail about 10 miles from the cabin when they encountered a group of 3 human hunters. The men took one look at Shara and reached for their weapons, and Rowan immediately stepped between them and her. "Stand aside, boy," the leader of the group said, a grizzled man with cold eyes. "That is an orc. We are clearing these woods of their kind." "This is my wife," Rowan said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "She has done you no harm. We are simply passing through." "Your wife?" The man spat the words like a curse. "You are a disgrace to your kind, lying with an animal." "Speak that way again and we will have a problem," Rowan said, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. The hunters looked at each other, clearly trying to decide if it was worth fighting. They were armed with bows and knives, and there were 3 of them against one man and an orc woman. But Rowan stood his ground, and after a tense minute, he felt Shara move to stand beside him. She had drawn her war axe, and there was a dangerous gleam in her eyes. "We do not want trouble," Shara said, her voice cold and hard. "But we will fight if we must. Your choice." The leader studied them both, and Rowan could see the calculation in his eyes. Finally, he spat on the ground. "Not worth it, but you had best watch yourselves. Not everyone will be as generous as we are." The hunters moved past them, giving them a wide berth, and Rowan did not relax until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Shara, who was trembling with suppressed rage. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I wanted to kill them," she said through clenched teeth. "I wanted to bury my axe in that man's skull. I know, but you did not. You chose restraint. It gets harder every time." Shara looked at him, and there was pain in her eyes. "Is this what our life will be? Always looking over our shoulders, always ready for violence? I hope not. But we knew it would not be easy. I hate that they called you a disgrace. I hate that loving me makes you a target for their hatred." Rowan pulled her into his arms. "Let them hate. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I would choose you again every single day." Shara buried her face in his shoulder, and he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. They stood that way for a long time, drawing strength from each other, and when they finally headed back to the cabin, they walked hand in hand, united against whatever the world might throw at them. The incident with the hunters made them more cautious. They stayed closer to the cabin and avoided contact with others as much as possible. But it also strengthened their resolve. They were building something real and precious, and they would not let fear or hatred destroy it. Spring arrived in full force, bringing warmer weather and the return of life to the forest. Shara's mood improved with the season, and she threw herself into preparing a garden plot near the cabin. Rowan helped her clear the land and build a fence to keep out deer and rabbits. They planted vegetables and herbs, working side by side in the warm sun, and Rowan thought he had never been happier. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Shara reached over and took his hand. "I have been thinking," she said slowly, "about the future. About what we want from this life. And what have you been thinking? That I want it all. I want to grow old with you. I want to build a real home here, not just a cabin, but a place that is truly ours. And I want—" She paused, looking almost shy. "I want children, someday, if you do." Rowan felt his heart swell with emotion. They had talked around the subject before, but Shara had never stated it so directly. "I want that too," he said. "All of it. Everything with you. even though our children would be half-breeds, even though they would belong fully to neither world. They would belong to our world, the world we create for them, and we would teach them to be proud of both halves of their heritage. Shara smiled, a radiant expression that took Rowan's breath away. Then we have a plan, a future. Yes, we have a future. As summer arrived, they were visited for the first time by someone from Riverside. Martha appeared one afternoon with a cart full of supplies, declaring that she had come to see how they were getting on. Shara was wary at first, but Martha's easy friendliness soon put her at ease. "I have always believed that love is love," Martha said matter-of-factly as she helped them unload the supplies. "And you two clearly love each other. That is all that matters in this world." "Not everyone shares your view," Shara pointed out. "No, they do not. But not everyone is a fool either. There are people in Riverside who would welcome you if you gave them the chance." It was a tantalizing possibility, the idea that they might not have to live in complete isolation, but both Rowan and Shara were hesitant to test it. The memory of the hunters was still fresh, and neither wanted to risk confrontation. Martha stayed for dinner, filling them in on news from the settlement. The border remained tense but stable, with no major conflicts since the war had ended. More refugees were arriving every day, both human and orc, people who were tired of fighting and just wanted to live their lives. Riverside was growing, becoming a true community where the two species coexisted with varying degrees of success. "You should come visit," Martha urged before she left. "Not everyone will accept you, but you might be surprised by how many will." After she left, Rowan and Shara discussed the invitation long into the night. Part of them wanted to remain in their safe isolation, but another part yearned for connection, for community. Finally, they decided they would visit Riverside before the summer ended, just to see what reception they received. The visit happened on a warm day in late July. They walked into town together, Rowan's hand in Shara's, presenting themselves openly as a couple. The reaction was mixed. Some people stared openly. A few made hostile comments, but others simply nodded greeting or went about their business. Martha welcomed them warmly and introduced them to several people who were kind and accepting. The most surprising encounter was with Broken Tooth, the old orc blacksmith. He studied Shara for a long moment, then said something in the orcish language that made her eyes widen. She responded haltingly, clearly rusty in her native tongue, and they had a brief conversation that Rowan could not follow. When it ended, Broken Tooth nodded approval at Rowan. "You chose well," he said in accented but clear human speech. "This one has honor. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." "What did he say to you?" Rowan asked Shara as they walked away. "He said I was brave to live my truth, and that the old gods would honor my choice even if my clan would not." "And he said—" She paused, her voice catching. "He said I remind him of his daughter who also chose love over duty and who he still misses every day." Rowan squeezed her hand. "We are not alone in this. No, I suppose we are not." They returned to Riverside several times over the summer, slowly building connections with the more accepting residents. It was not easy, and there were uncomfortable moments, but gradually they began to feel less isolated. They were creating a place for themselves in the world, carving out space where their love could exist openly. Autumn arrived with its explosion of colors, and Rowan and Shara harvested their garden with great satisfaction. They had grown more than enough vegetables to last the winter, with surplus to trade in Riverside. As they worked side by side, preserving food and preparing for the cold months ahead, Rowan felt a deep contentment. This was the life he had always wanted without knowing it: simple, honest work shared with someone he loved beyond measure. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Shara made an announcement. "I am pregnant," she said simply. Rowan froze, his mind taking several seconds to process the words. "You are certain?" "Yes. I have suspected for a few weeks, but now I am certain." Joy exploded through Rowan like a sunrise. He pulled Shara into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to be parents. We are going to have a child." "Are you happy?" Shara asked, though she was smiling through her own tears. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and ecstatic and overwhelmed and grateful all at once." They held each other for a long time, marveling at the miracle of new life growing between them. Their child would be the physical manifestation of their love, proof that two people from different worlds could create something beautiful together. The pregnancy was not easy. Shara suffered from severe nausea in the early months, and Rowan learned to cook bland foods that she could tolerate. As her belly grew, she became frustrated with her reduced mobility, and the way her normally strong body betrayed her with aches and pains. But through it all, there was a glow about her, a fierce joy that nothing could dim. Rowan threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from oak wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard, a blend of human and orcish symbols representing protection and love. He reinforced the cabin walls and stocked extra firewood. Martha brought baby clothes and blankets, gifts from the women of Riverside who had heard about the pregnancy. "You have more allies than you know," Martha told them. "There are people who see you as a symbol of hope, proof that our two peoples can find common ground." As winter set in again, Shara grew large with child. The pregnancy proceeded normally according to Martha, who had assisted at many births and had some knowledge of half-orc pregnancies from other mixed couples. The baby was due in late winter, and as the time drew closer, Rowan found himself both excited and terrified. The night Shara went into labor was one of the longest of Rowan's life. Martha was there, having moved into the cabin a week earlier to be ready, and she guided Shara through the contractions with calm expertise. Rowan held Shara's hand, whispering encouragement, feeling helpless and awed by her strength. The baby was born just after dawn, emerging into the world with a strong cry that filled the cabin. Martha cleaned the infant and placed them in Shara's arms, and Rowan looked down at his daughter with wonder. She was perfect. Her skin was a pale green, lighter than Shara's but distinctly orcish. She had tiny tusks just visible at the corners of her mouth, and her ears were slightly pointed. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were a beautiful hazel, a perfect blend of Rowan's brown and Shara's amber. "What should we name her?" Shara asked, exhausted but radiant. Rowan thought for a moment. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his daughter, he knew. "Sarah," he said, "for both our peoples, a name that works in both human and orcish." "Sarah," Shara repeated, testing the sound. "Shara Mercer." "Shara Grimtusk Mercer," Rowan amended. "She should carry both our names." Shara smiled up at him, tears streaming down her face. "She is ours. She is perfect." "Yes, she is." Martha left them alone after a few hours, returning to Riverside with the good news. Rowan and Shara spent the rest of that day simply marveling at their daughter, learning her tiny features, falling completely in love. Sarah was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in the cradle beside their bed. She had her mother's strength and her father's curiosity, and as the days passed, she became the center of their world. News of Sarah's birth spread through Riverside quickly, and to their surprise, they received visitors bearing gifts, food, clothes, wooden toys carved with care. Not everyone approved, but enough people did that Rowan and Shara felt embraced rather than shunned. Their daughter was seen as a symbol of hope, a bridge between two worlds. As spring arrived again, they planted their garden with Sarah sleeping in a sling against Shara's chest. They had survived another winter, stronger than before, and they looked toward the future with confidence. Rowan had never imagined that his life would take this path, but he could not imagine any other life now. One warm afternoon in early May, as they worked in the garden together, Rowan straightened up and looked at his family. Shara was singing softly to Sarah in the orcish language, teaching their daughter the songs of her people. The sight filled Rowan with such profound gratitude that he had to stop and simply take it in. Shara noticed him watching and smiled. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That we made it. Against all odds, against everything the world said was impossible, we built this life together. We are happy. Yes, we are very happy." Shara shifted Sarah in her arms. "And this is only the beginning. We have years ahead of us, a lifetime to build on what we have started." "A lifetime," Rowan agreed. "That sounds perfect." That evening, after Sarah was asleep, Rowan and Shara sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. They held hands in comfortable silence, needing no words to communicate what they felt. "Do you remember that night in the cellar?" Shara asked eventually. "When we were enemies trapped together, convinced we would go our separate ways at dawn." "I remember every word we spoke," Rowan said. "Every moment. If someone had told me then that this would be our future, that I would be sitting here with you, with our daughter sleeping inside, living a life I never dreamed possible, I would have thought they were mad. So would I, but here we are. Here we are." Shara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Rowan Mercer. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. And I love you, Shara Grimtusk. You gave me a life worth living, a family worth fighting for. You gave me everything." They sat that way until the stars came out. Two people from different worlds who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build a life in the light. Their love story was not an easy one, and they knew there would be challenges ahead. But they would face those challenges together, as they had faced everything else. As the months passed and Sarah grew from an infant into a toddler, Rowan and Shara's life continued to evolve. Their cabin became a true home, expanded and improved with each season. The garden flourished under their joint care, providing more than enough food for their family. They became regular visitors to Riverside, where Sarah was adored by the community that had come to accept her parents. On Sarah's first birthday, they threw a celebration that brought together friends from the settlement. Martha came with a beautiful hand-sewn dress for Sarah. Broken Tooth crafted a tiny pendant from silver, engraved with symbols of protection. The mixed heritage family they had met brought toys their own children had outgrown. It was a modest gathering by some standards, but to Rowan and Shara, it represented something profound: acceptance, community, and hope for the future. As Sarah took her first wobbly steps, Rowan and Shara stood on either side of her, ready to catch her if she fell. But Sarah was determined and strong, and she made it across the room on her own before tumbling into her mother's arms with a delighted laugh. Watching his daughter, Rowan saw the future he and Shara were creating: a world where children like Sarah could exist without shame, where love could transcend the artificial boundaries that divided people. That night, after Sarah was asleep, Rowan found Shara standing at the window, looking out at the moonlit forest. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we have come. About that terrified orc warrior hiding in a cellar, convinced she had failed her people. I barely recognize her now. She is still you. She is just happier now. Much happier. And it is all because of you, because you had the courage to look past what I was and see who I was." We saved each other that night, Rowan said softly. We just did not know it yet. Shara turned in his arms to face him. I want to make a promise to you, Rowan Mercer. I promise that I will love you for the rest of my days. I promise that I will be the best wife and mother I can be. And I promise that I will never forget what you sacrificed to be with me, and I will spend my life making sure you never regret that choice. I could never regret it, but I will make you a promise too. I promise to love you and Sarah with everything I am. I promise to build a life worthy of both of you. And I promise that I will always see you as you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful person I have ever known. They sealed their promises with a kiss, and then stood together at the window, looking out at the world that had tried so hard to keep them apart but had failed. They had won their happiness through courage and love, and nothing could take that away from them now. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions about everything. They taught her to respect both sides of her heritage, to be proud of who she was. When she was old enough, Shara began teaching her the ways of the forest, while Rowan taught her to read and write and tend the garden. More mixed families began to appear in the region, drawn by stories of Rowan and Shara's success. Some sought them out for advice or simply to know they were not alone. Rowan and Shara welcomed them all, offering support and friendship. Their cabin became an informal gathering place for those who straddled two worlds, a safe haven where they could be themselves without judgment. When Sarah was 5 years old, Shara became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their son was born on a bright summer morning. They named him River, after the waterway that marked the border between human and orc territory, but also connected them a reminder that boundaries could be crossed. River had his father's brown eyes and his mother's green skin, another beautiful blend of their two peoples. Sarah was a devoted big sister, helping to care for her brother with a seriousness that made both parents smile. Their family was complete, and their life was rich with love and purpose. As the children grew, Rowan and Shara worked to build bridges between the human and orc communities. They organized trade fairs where both peoples could exchange goods peacefully. They mediated disputes and offered their home as neutral ground for negotiations. It was slow, difficult work, and not everyone appreciated their efforts. But gradually, attitudes began to shift. The old hatreds did not disappear. They were too deeply rooted for that, but they began to erode at the edges. More mixed couples formed. More people on both sides began to question the prejudices they had been taught. Rowan and Shara's children grew up in a world that was still divided, but less so than the one their parents had known. On their 10th anniversary counted from that night in the cellar where everything had begun, Rowan and Shara took a rare evening to themselves. Martha had agreed to watch the children, and they walked hand in hand through the forest to a clearing they had discovered years earlier. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light, and they sat together on the soft grass, wrapped in each other's arms. 10 years, Shara said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Rowan agreed. Every day with you feels new, but I also cannot imagine a time when you were not in my life. You think we have made a difference? Do you think anything we have done matters in the larger scheme of things? Rowan thought about their children, about the families they had helped, about the small but growing community of people who believed in coexistence. Yes, he said firmly, we have made a difference. Maybe not in grand, sweeping ways, but in the ways that matter most in individual lives, in hearts and minds slowly changing. That is how real change happens, one person at a time, one act of courage at a time. I hope you are right. I know I am. Look at our children. Look at Sarah and River. They are growing up believing that love matters more than species, that kindness matters more than tradition. They will teach their children the same lessons, and those children will teach theirs. That is our legacy, Shara. That is what we are building. Shara kissed him then, a deep kiss full of passion and promise and profound gratitude. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this life. Thank you for saving me, for being brave enough to trust me, for choosing me every day." They stayed in the clearing until the moon began to set, talking about their dreams for the future, their hopes for their children, their plans for the homestead. Eventually, they headed back to the cabin, walking slowly through the moonlit forest, savoring the peace and beauty of the night. When they returned, Martha reported that the children had been perfect angels, though the gleam in her eye suggested this might be a slight exaggeration. After she left, Rowan and Shara looked in on Sarah and River, both sleeping peacefully in their beds. They stood together in the doorway, watching their children breathe, and felt the weight of their responsibility and the joy of their privilege. "We did good," Shara murmured. "Yes. We did very good." As the years continued to pass, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew strong and healthy, learning the skills they would need to thrive in their complex world. Sarah showed a talent for diplomacy and mediation, often helping younger children resolve their disputes with wisdom beyond her years. River inherited his mother's connection to the forest and his father's patience, becoming an excellent tracker and hunter. When Sarah was 12, she asked her parents about the night they met. Rowan and Shara looked at each other, silently agreeing that their daughter was old enough to hear the full story. They told her everything: the battle, the cellar, the slow building of trust and love, the difficulties they had faced and overcome. Sarah listened intently, and when they finished, she had tears in her eyes. "You were so brave," she said, "both of you, to risk everything for love." "We had no choice," Shara replied. "When you feel something that strongly, you have to follow it, consequences be damned. Will I feel that way someday? Perhaps, if you are lucky. I hope I am as brave as you when my time comes." Rowan pulled his daughter into a hug. "You are already brave, Sarah. You live your truth every day, proud of who you are despite what some people might think. That is the bravest thing of all." The conversation stayed with Rowan long after Sarah had gone to bed. He realized that their daughter was growing up, becoming her own person, and soon she would face the challenges that came with being caught between two worlds. But he also knew that she was strong and smart and surrounded by love. She would find her way, just as he and Shara had found theirs. More years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of their children. Sarah entered adolescence with grace, though not without the typical storms of emotion that came with that age. River remained quieter but equally passionate, particularly about protecting the forest and the animals that lived in it. Both children were well loved in Riverside and respected in the scattered orc communities that had begun to trade with the settlement. When Sarah was 16, a young man from Riverside, a kind, thoughtful boy named James, began courting her with shy determination. Rowan and Shara watched this development with mixed feelings: pride that their daughter had attracted such a good person, anxiety about her growing up and potentially leaving home. But mostly, they felt hope. Sarah's romance was accepted without question by the community, a sign of how far they had all come. River, at 14, showed no interest in romance yet, preferring to spend his time exploring the wilderness with his mother or learning carpentry from his father. He talked about becoming a ranger someday, someone who protected both the forest and the people who lived near it. It was a noble ambition, and both parents encouraged him. On a warm evening in late spring, when the air was full of birdsong and the smell of blooming flowers, the whole family gathered on the expanded porch they had built years earlier. Sarah and James sat together, her hand in his, while River sprawled on the steps whittling a piece of wood. Rowan and Shara sat in their favorite chairs, watching their children with contentment. "I have been thinking," Sarah said suddenly, "about what I want to do with my life. James and I have been talking, and we want to do something important, something that matters." "What did you have in mind?" Rowan asked. "We want to start a school, a place where children, human, orc, or mixed, can learn together, where they can be taught that their differences make them stronger, not weaker, where the next generation can grow up better than ours did." Shara leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "That is an ambitious goal, I know, but you always taught me that anything worth doing is ambitious, and I think this is worth doing. Will you help us?" Rowan and Shara exchanged glances, and in that look was a whole conversation: pride in their daughter's vision, excitement about the project, and recognition that this was their legacy continuing into the next generation. "Of course we will help," Rowan said. "Whatever you need." The project consumed the next 2 years. They worked with Martha and other supporters in Riverside to secure land and funding. They reached out to orc clans, carefully building trust and gaining support. Sarah and James threw themselves into planning curriculum and recruiting teachers from both communities. River contributed by building furniture for the classrooms and creating beautiful carvings to decorate the walls. The school opened on a bright autumn morning with 20 children in attendance, 12 human, 6 orc, and 2 mixed heritage. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. Sarah stood at the front of the first classroom, her face glowing with purpose, and Rowan felt his heart might burst with pride. Over the following years, the school grew steadily. More children enrolled, drawn by the quality of education and the welcoming atmosphere. More teachers joined the staff. The school became a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict, love over hate. Sarah and James married in a ceremony that blended human and orcish traditions, with both families celebrating together. It was a joyous occasion, made even more special by the way the entire community turned out to support them. As Rowan watched his daughter dance with her new husband, he thought about how far they had all come from that desperate night in the cellar. River eventually did become a ranger, patrolling the borderlands and keeping peace between the communities. He had his mother's skill in the wilderness and his father's diplomatic touch, and he was widely respected by both peoples. He remained single, claiming he was married to the forest, though Shara often teased him that the right person simply had not come along yet. As Rowan and Shara entered middle age, they began to slow down, letting their children take on more of the work of building bridges between communities. But they remained active and engaged, always ready to offer advice or support when needed. Their cabin had become something of a landmark, a place where anyone could find acceptance and wisdom. One winter evening, as they sat by the fire with grandchildren playing at their feet, Sarah and James had blessed them with 3 beautiful grandchildren, each one a unique blend of human and orc. Shara turned to Rowan with a smile. "We did it," she said simply. "We built the life we dreamed of. We created a legacy that will outlive us." "Yes," Rowan agreed, watching a grandchild toddle past chasing a wooden toy. "We did. And it all started with 2 enemies hiding in a cellar, scared and desperate and convinced they would never see each other again. The best things often start in the most unlikely places." "True." Rowan pulled Shara close, feeling the comfortable weight of her against his side. "I love you. I have loved you from that first night, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Rowan Mercer." You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. You showed me what it means to truly live." They sat together in peaceful silence, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that their love had changed the world in small but meaningful ways. Their story was not one of grand battles or dramatic gestures. It was a story of two people who chose each other despite everything, who built a life one day at a time, who proved that love could transcend any boundary. As the years continued to advance, Rowan and Shara grew old together with the grace that comes from a life well lived. Their hair grayed, their movements slowed, but their love remained as strong as ever. They spent their days tending a smaller garden, playing with grandchildren, and welcoming the steady stream of visitors who sought their counsel or simply wanted to spend time with the legendary couple who had helped change the world. The border between human and orc territory, once a line of hatred and violence, had become something more fluid and peaceful. Mixed communities were common now, and while prejudice had not been eliminated, it had been significantly reduced. The schools Sarah had founded had spawned similar institutions across the region. A new generation was growing up with different assumptions about what was possible. On their 50th anniversary, still counted from that night in the cellar, their children and grandchildren threw them a massive celebration. People came from all over the region to honor them, bringing gifts and sharing stories of how Rowan and Shara had touched their lives. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, laughter and tears. But the moment Rowan cherished most came late in the evening, when he and Shara slipped away from the party to walk one more time to their favorite clearing in the forest. The moon was full again, just as it had been on so many important nights of their life together, and they sat in the same spot where they had sat 50 years earlier. 50 years, Shara marveled, her voice rougher with age but still strong. Half a century since that night when we should have killed each other but chose to talk instead. "Best choice I ever made," Rowan said, his arm around her shoulders. "Sitting in that darkness, listening to you speak, I knew even then that you were extraordinary. I just did not know how extraordinary. We were so young, so naive about how hard it would be. Would you change anything? Knowing what you know now, would you choose differently?" Shara turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, Rowan could still see the fierce young warrior she had been, burning bright beneath the lines and gray hair. "Never," she said firmly. "Not a single moment. Every difficulty, every challenge, every sacrifice, they were all worth it for this life we built. I feel the same way." Rowan kissed her forehead gently. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Shara Grimtusk. And you are still foolishly romantic, Rowan Mercer." They laughed together, the easy laughter of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other unconditionally. They stayed in the clearing until dawn began to lighten the sky, talking about their life, their children, their grandchildren, and the world they would leave behind. When they finally returned to the cabin, their family was waiting with breakfast and more celebration. The party continued for another full day, and by the time everyone finally departed, Rowan and Shara were exhausted but deeply happy. Their final years were peaceful. They watched more grandchildren be born and grow. They saw Sarah's school expand to multiple locations. They saw River become chief ranger of the borderlands, respected by all. They saw the world continue to change, slowly but steadily, toward the vision they had always held. When the end came for Rowan, it came gently. He simply went to sleep one night beside Shara and did not wake. He was 83 years old, and he died as he had lived in recent decades peacefully, surrounded by love. Shara held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart broke, she found comfort in knowing they had had 53 years together. years beyond what either had dared dream in that cellar so long ago. Shara lived for 3 more years after Rowan's passing, surrounded by children and grandchildren who cared for her with tender devotion. She remained sharp until the end, still offering advice and telling stories about the old days. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Rowan, and she was simply waiting to join him. When her time came, she died in the same bed where Rowan had died, in the cabin they had shared for more than half a century. Her last words were his name, spoken with love and longing. Sarah was holding one hand and River the other, and though they wept, they also smiled, knowing their mother was at peace. They buried Rowan and Shara together in the clearing they had loved, beneath a massive oak tree that had witnessed so much of their life together. The funeral brought together hundreds of people, humans and orcs, old friends and young students, people whose lives had been touched by the remarkable couple. There were tears and laughter, grief and celebration, as everyone remembered the 2 enemies who had hidden in a cellar one terrible night, and emerged as something the world had never seen before. Sarah spoke at the funeral, her voice strong despite her tears. "My parents taught me that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that it can overcome hatred, bridge divides, and change the world. They proved it every single day of their lives together. They were just 2 people who chose to see past the barriers that divided them, who chose to build instead of destroy, to love instead of hate. And because of that choice, made in darkness and fear, hundreds of lives were changed for the better. That is their legacy. That is what we must carry forward." The community erected a monument in Riverside honoring Rowan and Shara, a sculpture showing a human and an orc standing hand in hand, looking toward the horizon. Beneath it was inscribed simply, "Love bridges all divides." Their cabin was preserved as a museum and meeting place, a reminder of what was possible when people chose understanding over prejudice. Students from Sarah's schools made regular pilgrimages to visit it, learning the story of the soldier and the warrior who became something more. In the years that followed, as the region continued to evolve toward greater integration and peace, people often invoked Rowan and Shara's names as examples of courage and love. Their story was told and retold, becoming legend even as it remained grounded in truth. Children grew up hearing about the night in the cellar, the truce that became a marriage, the enemies who became partners in building a better world. And sometimes, on moonlit nights, people walking through the forest near that special clearing would report seeing 2 figures standing together beneath the oak tree, a tall human man and a strong orc woman, holding hands and looking at each other with unmistakable love. Whether these sightings were real or simply wishful thinking, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that if any love was strong enough to transcend death itself, it would be theirs. Their story had begun with 2 enemies hiding in one cellar through the night, making a truce born of desperation. But it had become so much more than that, a testament to the power of seeing people as individuals rather than enemies, of choosing hope over hate, of building bridges instead of walls. Rowan and Shara had not set out to change the world. They had simply chosen to love each other despite everything that said they should not. But in that choice, made and reaffirmed every day for more than 50 years, they had proven that even the deepest divides could be crossed, even the oldest hatreds could be overcome, and even the most unlikely love could flourish and grow into something that would outlast them both, echoing through generations as proof of what was possible when courage and compassion met in the darkness and chose to create light.